Alright, so I think the first thing we should do is we're making a fun little action RPG game here, is make a character controller, because I don't have a 3D character controller yet. It's been a little over a year since that moment, and we've come a long way in that time. In that first video, I literally only focused on making a little capsule move around. And from then on, I would upload weekly videos making a new feature, adding health, adding a character with animations, adding a combat system, and so on and so forth. Really, about 75% of what my game is like right now was already made there by the end of that very first month, at least in general shape. But production of a creative project is never as easy as it seems. For instance, even though we're a year later, I have recently rewritten and reanimated a significant part of my combat code and animations, which was already a revised version of the mess that I had coded in the initial devlog about it. So I want to take you through my 1 year of game development on this project in this video. When I first jumped into this, I knew I wanted to make an action RPG. It would take months before I had a clearer picture of what I was actually going to make, which is just a bad idea in general, because it meant I was constantly reworking a bunch of ideas and just wasting a lot of time. But on the other hand, it did help me learn a lot of things. And either way, basic things like needing a player character, enemy models, having HP, simple things like that would be required for this type of game anyway. So once I figured that all out, I could keep myself busy doing other things. And so I did. Creating those basic building blocks until it was time to start thinking about how those all would work together to make actual levels. I'm making a game here, after all, and at some point those pieces would need to start coming together. And after 3 months, we were now at the start of 2023. I had spent plenty of time thinking about the rough shape of what would eventually become my current blueprints for the game. The way you start in a peaceful, grassy area and make your way through a simple tutorial that will teach you the basics of the game, and then be let loose in a wider, much more open world where you can go on your adventure to find and defeat all of these bosses. Around that time is also when I came up with the idea of having every boss specialize in a certain type of weapon, and then as a reward for beating that boss, you unlock that weapon. Kind of like you get the weapons of the bosses you defeat in Mega Man. And so what started as my own take on a Kingdom Hearts game quickly grew into something much wider and something much bigger. The combat feel of Kingdom Hearts, but the atmosphere and boss-focused game loop from a game like Dark Souls, and the reward structure from Mega Man, and many more games all coming together to make what would likely become my dream game. And so I worked, and eventually we ended up with a fully working tutorial. Sure, it was a little rough around the edges, but everything worked, and it was time to let some people playtest this for me. And then the playtest came back with mixed feedback. The game was rather stale, enemies all felt really the same, and things just ended up being a button-mashing snooze fest. Along with players also triggering a whole list of weird bugs, getting stuck in strange corners of levels, knocking enemies out of reach, and altogether too many issues for me to all name here, but enough for me to take a step back and think about how am I going to fix all of this. You see, before this project, I mainly made games in Unreal Engine, and this was really my first dive into a more proper game in Unity, which was part of the reason I didn't plan things out so much. It was meant to be mostly a way for me to play around with and test my new skill sets. But now that I was 6 months into the project, it had turned from that into a true passion project, and I was faced with having to rewrite a huge part of my code, effectively starting from scratch, to fix all of the really weird issues that players had found.
I'm excited to get to show you some of the new experimental features we've been working on for Unreal Engine 5.2. Let's take a look.
And it was around this time that Unreal revealed its 5.2 updates, and I just knew I had to give Unreal another shot. If I had to rewrite my whole game anyway, I may as well just give it a shot in Unreal, right? My coding skills had dramatically improved in those 6 months, and maybe I could actually take on working in C++ now. And that way I could see how different my game would look and feel if it was remade in Unreal Engine. So that is what I did. I dedicated a month to following a C++ course for Unreal, toy around with things to get a decent grasp on it, at which point I started to rebuild all of the code I had in Unity from scratch in Unreal Engine. Of course, this time I had a much clearer vision of what the game should be like, and as such I was able to write code very fast and frankly also in a much better way than I initially did in Unity. I already knew what features I wanted and what code that would roughly require and how they should work together. So where it took me 3 or 4 months to get the basic feature set up in Unity before, I was able to rebuild that in Unreal in about a month, maybe a month and a half. And after all that time, the Unreal version looked and more importantly felt so much better to just play around with. So from that moment on, the game continued development in Unreal Engine. Of course I had to rebuild the whole tutorial, much like my code, but the levels designs in my tutorials were very poorly thought out and slapped together to begin with, so that was also a thing that probably needed to be done either way as well. I also managed to fix many of the issues with the combat that people ran into with Anime AI, and Unreal's tools really helped me with making those AIs feel at least somewhat reasonable. But the most important change I made was to the basic gameplay loop, breaking up from just constantly fighting enemies, because I realized that adding some basic platforming and light puzzle solving would create some contrast for the combat heavy levels that I had been making so far. So while the combat itself did already feel a lot better, I also needed to give people something to do other than just constantly fighting enemies, which eventually ended up with the dungeon structures that I have right now. 3 keys to unlock the boss: a combat trial, a platforming trial, and a puzzle trial. Which brings us back to today. 1 year and so many fuck-ups later, I am back to the point where my tutorial can function as a prototype and a test build for people to play as a demo. As I'm writing this video, I have a sketch of the map of the rest of the game going, and well, having looked back at the past year and now looking ahead into the future of this game, I can say that's both terrific and terrifying. So if you want to keep up to date with all that can and probably will go wrong in the future, do hit that subscribe button below this video, and if all goes well, there should also be a link in the description of this video to the prototype build for those of you who do want to try it. If you could follow the instructions in the document, that would be great. Just play through the build and answer some of the questions in the Google form so that I can actually get some feedback on my game and work through that. For now though, thanks for watching, and I'll soon be back with another video. And a very big thank you to all of my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help out supporting the channel, there's a link down below in the description to the Patreon page. And a special thanks to my Cave Digger tier Patreons, Sir J. Thomas and Eleanor.